You know, my mother worked in an office her whole life. That's why stories like this aren't just content for use. They're about real-life experiences that are familiar to too many people. All the titles, names, and companies in the story are fictional, but the essence is real. I do this so that you can recognize yourself and avoid repeating other people's mistakes.
I want him out. Today. That's what I heard from behind the glass. My office sat 3 doors down from the executive suite, and the walls weren't as soundproof as Declan Brandt assumed. His voice always carried, entitlement tends to echo like that. I was refilling my thermos with burnt coffee from the break room when I heard it. Plain as day. His first morning on the job, and he was already playing executioner, perched like a little prince behind the desk his father built, with grit, debt, and 27 years of real leadership. He didn't even know who he was firing. 12 years. 12 years of building an operation system that practically breathed on its own. I wasn't flashy, never asked for promotions or perks, didn't do the fake networking lunches or corporate retreats where grown men play trust falls in Patagonia vests. I worked. While they slept, I coded. While they postured, I patched supply chain blind spots and automated the logistics rot no one else even noticed. Bolt grid, they called it, because it held everything together. If you've made it this far into the story and you're one of the 97% listening without hitting subscribe, now's a good time. Click it. Like the video too, it keeps the stories coming and reminds the team this madness matters to someone. Thanks. Now back to Declan, the founder's son, the MBA messiah. He rolled into the office like he was late for a photo shoot. Shoes too shiny, hair too strategic. His first words in the Monday operations meeting weren't hello or thank you or even what the hell do you all do here? No, they were, and I quote, we're sunsetting legacy systems, starting with the dinosaur in scheduling. Bolt grid. My dinosaur. He didn't look at me when he said it, didn't even pretend. Just scrolled his emails while legal and IT flanked him like Secret Service agents. I sat quietly in my chair, legs crossed, pen poised, and wrote down his exact words on the back of my notebook. I wasn't insulted. I was interested. Because if he thought BoltGrid was just a tool, some crusty piece of back-end duct tape, we had a very different understanding of what had kept WelderTech humming during hurricanes, cyber attacks, supplier strikes, and a literal bridge collapse in Missouri. He never asked where it came from. No one did, really. It just showed up during the 2014 breakdown, like a guardian angel in source code. Legal retrofitted it into the compliance logs as a custom legacy integration. But I knew better. I'd built it in a panic, launched it under my own LLC when the old platform crashed and almost cost us 3 contracts. The board was desperate then. They used whatever worked. And mine did. When I converted from contractor to full-time in 2015, they skipped the deep paperwork. Too busy celebrating resilience under fire. Never got around to transferring the code. And I never reminded them. Because I knew. So did the documents. For the last 7 years, they've been running on a system they never owned. A system they leased, quietly, annually, with a license key buried inside a scheduler that no one ever bothered to read. Because it just worked. Until now. Until Declan. He strutted into the company like he was Moses parting the Red Sea, arms full of buzzwords, face full of podcasts, and a burning desire to put his mark on something he didn't understand. He pitched mergers with logistics firms that made us all squint. He promised AI integrations and rebranding strategies like he was talking about an influencer's Instagram, not a company managing rail routes and municipal supply chains. And on day 1, he decided I was expendable. I didn't fight it, didn't grovel, didn't warn him, just smiled, jotted down the phrase, sunsetting the dinosaur, and went back to work. Because when you build the foundation, you don't panic when someone threatens to knock down a wall. You just wait, quietly, calmly, because you know where the wires run and who holds the fuse. Declan moved like a man trying to prove something to a father who'd already stopped watching. Within 48 hours of sitting in the big chair, he'd axed half of procurement, reorganized logistics, and announced a strategic realignment that sounded like it had been scraped off a Reddit startup thread. Everything had a name now. Synergy clusters, cloud-native unification, digital-first verticals. The man couldn't order lunch without branding it. Then came the death sentence for BoltGrid. He didn't even say it with hesitation. Just marched into the Monday briefing, chest puffed, lips pursed like he was about to drop the cure for cancer, and said, "We're replacing the scheduling dinosaur with a unified platform, fully integrated with Apex Stream systems." Apex Stream was the Tampa firm he was courting, bloated, bureaucratic, but shiny enough for shareholders to squint and clap. Not a single person in the room looked at me. That was the part I noticed. Not surprise, not even discomfort, just silence, as if they didn't know Bolt Grid had teeth, as if it was just another thing on the wall they assumed would keep humming when they slapped a new sticker on it. He didn't ask me. He didn't request input. He simply told the room like it was already done. I waited for the moment. When the room cleared and his parade moved on, I said one thing. Bolt Grid's ownership is more complicated than you assume. He didn't even blink, just leaned back in his father's chair and parroted the same line I've heard from every mid-tier suit who once read a tweet about intellectual property. Everything built on company time belongs to WelderTech. I smiled like a woman who'd already checked the fire exits. That night, I dug into my archives. Not the public files, the private ones, back when I ran ops as a third-party contractor during the 2014 collapse. I remember the night vividly, 2 hours to patch a supply chain hole or lose $3.8 million in goods stuck at rail junctions. Their platform failed. Mine didn't. I deployed Bolt Grid on a panic-fueled coffee high and emailed the temp license from my personal LLC, LevyCore Solutions. And it worked. It worked so well they never unplugged it. When they begged me to go full-time months later, they never circled back on ownership. No one re-signed anything. No clause changed the code's parentage. I checked the contract language. License granted, renewable annually, non-exclusive, revocable upon breach or expiration. It was airtight. Not flashy, but binding. They used it because it worked. Paid the license fees without reading the metadata. IT set it on autopilot. Legal logged it under legacy frameworks. I never once pushed. Never raised flags. Why would I? It ran smoothly, updates were silent, and I got my quiet check every March under an innocuous vendor line item nobody read. And now, here we were. Mr. Harvard MBA rolling in, certain he'd uncovered the rot. Eager to bulldoze it for a cloud service he barely understood. He thought we were building blocks he could rearrange, but some blocks bite back. I poured a glass of wine and read every line of that agreement 3 times. No ambiguity, no wiggle room, no assignment of IP, no clause granting WelderTech ownership of the source. The framework might have been born on their battlefield, but it was coded in my name and never adopted legally. I closed the file, then opened another. The one labeled Contingency Plan License Revocation. Just in case, because I knew this day would come. Maybe not with Declan, maybe not with Apex Stream, but someone, someday, would forget where the bones were buried, and I'd be ready. At exactly 8:42 a.m., my office door opened without a knock. Declan strolled in like a bored game show host, trailed by a woman from HR with a clipboard and a rent-a-cop in a short-sleeve uniform who looked like he practiced his authority voice in the mirror. Declan didn't bother to look up from the MacBook tucked under his arm, fingers tapping casually as if this moment bored him already. "You're fired," he said flatly. "Effective right now. Security will walk you out. Hand over everything." Not, "Can we talk?" Not, "Here's what's happening," just a pre-rehearsed execution, like I was a misbehaving intern who spilled cold brew on the company printer. I didn't move, just studied his face, smooth, smug, pale, like someone who'd never had to sit in a server room at 3 a.m. trying to stop a logistics pipeline from collapsing because a vendor in Tulsa forgot daylight savings. I stood up slow. No panic, no argument. "You'll want to notify your father," I said, "that the board meeting later today should be interesting." He barely glanced at me. "There's no meeting." "There will be," I replied, and set my badge on the desk like it was nothing more than a napkin after a polite lunch. The security guy shifted his weight, eager to escort. HR cleared her throat like she thought she was running the scene. "You're not taking anything with you," she snapped. "No need," I said, and smiled. I didn't need files, didn't need folders, USBs, backups, or even my login credentials. Because Bolt Grid wasn't tied to me physically, it was a living thing that ran across 12 states in dozens of terminals, factories, ports, and rail yards, and it didn't need me to breathe. It just needed one thing: license validation, which I had just quietly let expire. Declan didn't know it yet, but he hadn't just fired me. He'd removed the last human being in the building who knew where the off switch was, and now he'd yanked the cord. BoltGrid's next scheduled validation check was at 10 a.m. I knew that because I built it. Once that key failed, the system would begin to shut itself down. Not all at once. This wasn't Hollywood, but gradually, silently, like frost moving across a windshield. Modules would freeze, handoffs would miss, scheduling queues would stop responding. Procurement wouldn't notice until trucks started idling in the wrong yards. Field reps would think it was a sync delay. IT would blame the update they pushed last Friday. And somewhere around lunch, someone would finally look at a terminal and see the words, license, key invalid, contact holder. But by then, I'd be gone. Not running, not hiding, just elsewhere. They wouldn't be able to reboot it, not without triggering the fork protocol, not without a license key that didn't exist inside their walls, not without reading the clause in the 2015 agreement they'd all forgotten about. The one that said very plainly that any unauthorized replication, decompilation, or integration of the codebase would trigger a binding arbitration clause and a $2.5 million penalty per incident. Declan had fired me thinking he was eliminating a problem. What he did was cut the last wire holding up the roof. I left the office with my head high, hands empty. No drama, no threats, no tears. Because real control doesn't make noise. It waits. And then it walks out calmly, while everything else starts to fall apart. By lunchtime, the building hummed with the frantic energy of people realizing they were suddenly, irreversibly screwed. It started with a weird delay in Warehouse B's live dashboard. Then field support out of St. Louis reported their handoffs weren't syncing. Dispatchers couldn't confirm drop windows. By 11:38 a.m., someone in logistics said, "Hey, does anyone else's BoltGrid screen just say, revoked?" And that's when the phone started ringing. Every line. At once. Not customer calls, internal chaos, procurement, freight coordinators, yard supervisors, even a project lead from Nevada who hadn't spoken to me in 4 years was apparently trying to circle back now. Every terminal, coast to coast, showed the same simple, brutal message. License key revoked. Contact holder. Declan tried to play it cool at first. Strolled through ops like it was just a hiccup. Asked if someone pushed the wrong config, told it to roll back whatever update broke it. But then IT called legal, and legal didn't call anyone because they were already digging. It didn't take long. I knew exactly where the bodies were buried because I buried them properly. Clause 12B, right there in the 2000 fighting system licensing contract. A digital fossil with teeth. No transfer of proprietary code shall be considered valid unless executed in writing and signed by the license holder. No copy, no fork, no rehost. Period. Not a metaphor, not open to interpretation. The kind of clause you slide in late at night when nobody at legal wants to admit they skipped the due diligence. And the license holder? Still Levicore Solutions, LLC, still me. They'd forgotten that BoltGrid wasn't company property. It was a licensed product that WelderTech had been using for 7 years under a quiet, renewable agreement. An agreement that had just expired on purpose and had never been re-executed. Because nobody paid attention. Because no one ever asked how the machine stayed on as long as the lights were still blinking. But now those lights were blinking red. The Tampa merger team put their due diligence on hold. Contractors began issuing performance breach notices. Our biggest shipping partner emailed something about failure to meet critical path compliance. And someone from finance had the brilliant idea of asking legal if we could just clone it. Clone it? Good luck. The moment they touched that code without permission, Clause A 22A would hit like a brick. Immediate arbitration and a $2.5 million per instance penalty, plus legal injunction for IP violation. Not that Declan read that far. He was too busy blaming technical debt and muttering something about hiring a third-party integrator. What he didn't understand, and what no one had the heart to say out loud, was that BoltGrid wasn't just a piece of legacy software. It was the nervous system. Every shipment, schedule, sensor ping, weather delay alert, it all ran through it. Removing it was like asking a body to function without a spine. The dominoes had started falling. And Declan? He was still in denial, pacing back and forth in his glass box, snapping at assistants, muttering about calling the founder like his father was going to sweep in with a magic fix. But the truth had surfaced. The system was gone. Not broken. Not crashed. Just withdrawn. And all they could do now was sit in the dark and wonder who else had heard the word revoked. Declan did what every entitled golden boy does when the floor starts caving in. He blamed everyone but the person in the mirror. First, he called it a hiccup. Told the department heads it was temporary system fatigue, like BoltGrid had just decided to take a little nap. Then he pivoted to the aging infrastructure story, which would have worked if BoltGrid hadn't been the only system still functioning during the last 6 hurricane seasons. But my personal favorite? The sabotage theory. He stood in front of a dozen confused department leads, gestured wildly at the red error screens behind him, and said, "She built this thing like a trap door. You're telling me this wasn't planned?" It was a trap door, technically, but not out of malice, out of foresight, out of necessity, and, if I'm being honest, a little out of spite. You don't spend over a decade being overlooked and interrupted without leaving a few dead man switches in your wake. Meanwhile, legal was already 20 steps ahead of him. They didn't need theories. They had paperwork, contracts, timestamps, digital footprints, and most damning of all, silence. The kind of silence that grows in a conference room when everyone suddenly realizes they've stepped in it, deep and wide. Because what they had wasn't a stack of gotcha documents. It was the absence of one. No license reassignment. No executed IP transfer. No clause that handed over ownership of BoltGrid to WelderTech Industries. The system was used under a renewable annual license, quietly billed, quietly renewed, filed under vendor ID C24408, which was tied to my LLC. And the part that really kicked them in the teeth? They'd stopped renewing it. Sometime after the last restructure, someone in finance assumed it was legacy fluff and pulled the line item. It vanished with the rest of the cost optimization cuts. No one thought to ask why a $28,000 annual invoice was still generating uptime for 12 states. So when that license expired, BoltGrid didn't crash. It just stopped talking. And now they were locked out. Not by a hacker, not by sabotage, but by their own damn negligence. They were holding a fully operational system they no longer had permission to use. And since they didn't own the code, couldn't clone the system, and couldn't legally replicate any of the underlying architecture, they had exactly one option. Wait. Wait for someone to hand them the key they threw away. And while they were waiting, the merger hung in purgatory. Apex Stream's team issued a delay notice, citing infrastructure concerns and uptime irregularities. Translation: we're not buying into a company that can't access 78% of its core operations. It was glorious. I watched the reports pile up from the comfort of my kitchen table, sipping black coffee while the company I gave 12 years to spiraled in circles, trying to find a door I'd quietly locked months ago. Declan's voice cracked during the third emergency all-hands. "We've got our top legal minds reviewing this," he said, blinking too much, cheeks flushed red. "We'll have a solution very soon." But there wasn't one. Because in corporate law, a missing signature is louder than 1,000 panic calls, and mine was nowhere on the page. At 3:11 p.m., the first olive branch landed in my inbox. Subject line: "Let's discuss a resolution." No greeting, no name, just a 6-line paragraph wrapped in legal ambiguity and corporate humility. They wanted to find a path forward and re-engage with mutual respect, which is legal speak for, "We just realized we kicked out the person who built the oxygen supply. At 4:09, the gloves came off. A text this time. Short, frantic, no punctuation. What would it take to sign this over?" Not if I'd consider signing, "Not would you talk to us." Just, "Name your price." The panic had settled in. I didn't reply. I forwarded both messages to my attorney, who, bless her heart, responded with a single emoji, a duck in a top hat. That's how you know you've got the right lawyer. Then came the final, slimiest attempt. A voicemail left by someone I hadn't heard from since the company holiday party 4 years ago, back when they still served real food and had the budget for a jazz quartet. "We'll say this was a misunderstanding," the voice said. If you're willing to return in a consulting capacity, no need to drag this out. That was the part that made me laugh, not the offer. Please, as if I'd crawl back under Declan's glass boot. No, it was the phrase, drag this out. As if I had done a single thing but sit quietly and sip my coffee while their house caught fire from sparks they themselves lit. They didn't want resolution. They wanted silence, control. They wanted me to come back under contract so they could lock me down, muzzle the fallout, and quietly sweep the whole thing under the rug before the board caught wind of just how deep the screw-up ran. But it was already too late. Our second largest contractor, Bridgeline Freight out of Omaha, had just filed formal notice of service disruption. They couldn't deliver materials without BoltGrid's real-time scheduling interface. No live updates meant no reroutes, no adaptive staging, no just-in-time drop-offs. Trucks sat idle. Rail schedules desynced. A terminal manager in Memphis reportedly used a fax machine for the first time in 15 years. Every hour BoltGrid stayed dark cost WelderTech north of $95,000 in penalties, missed SLAs, and rerouting surcharges. That's not counting what Apex Stream was quietly recalculating behind closed doors. And me? I said nothing. Didn't tweet, didn't email, didn't touch base or circle back or offer clarification. Because this wasn't a negotiation. This was a slow recognition. A reckoning measured not in raised voices, but in the weight of each unsent reply. They'd spent the day trying to buy back access to a system they no longer deserved. And now, for the first time in a decade, they understood who'd really held the steering wheel all along. And I had already moved my next piece. A quiet calendar invite, a name, a room, and 4 signatures waiting. The board didn't know it yet, but the real meeting was about to start. 2 days after my badge hit Declan's desk, I stepped into a glass-paneled conference room 5 floors up, overlooking Union Station in the morning haze. The air was thick with tension, but not mine. I carried none of it. The nervous energy belonged entirely to the 4 men seated across from me. Directors, legacy board members, the kind who didn't flinch easily. But today, they looked like they hadn't slept. Not one of them greeted me as a contractor, because I wasn't. I wasn't there to offer tech advice. I wasn't there to ask for my job back or explain why BoltGrid was dark. I was there because my calendar invite simply said, Equity Review Meeting, holder of 60.3% voting rights present. Their eyes did the math in real time. I watched the shift happen, slow, reluctant respect clawing its way up their spines as they realized I wasn't just the woman who used to sit quietly in ops, fixing what they broke. I was the largest single voting bloc in the company. They hadn't remembered, but I had. Years ago, Paul Brandt, the founder, the actual architect of WelderTech's soul, distributed equity to core team members during a particularly rough quarter. Loyalty deserves teeth, he'd said, and offered stock options with full vesting to anyone willing to stay and rebuild instead of flee. Most people sold theirs for bonuses or home renovations. I didn't. Every time I got a raise, I reinvested a sliver back in, year by year, quietly, without fanfare. Just enough to stay under the radar, but consistent enough to accumulate power. By the time Paul stepped down and his son started pretending he'd earned the throne, I had passed 60.3% of total voting shares. And no one noticed. Because no one reads ledgers anymore. They skim dashboards. They assume governance is someone else's job. So now, sitting across from Declan's emergency damage control squad, I opened a small leather folder. Inside, a pre-drafted motion to restructure the executive chain of command, temporarily reassign operational oversight to an emergency management committee, and suspend merger negotiations until internal IP compliance could be reestablished. In plain English, Declan was about to be relieved of his duties and the company was about to get its spine back. One of the men, Bradford, cleared his throat. Why now? I looked him dead in the eye. Because I waited long enough. Another one asked, Is this personal? No, I said, it's structural. And I meant it. Declan had made it personal. He walked in with swagger and a trust fund and assumed no one in this building had memory or muscle. But I wasn't here for revenge. I was here to study the thing I helped build. Because unlike him, I didn't inherit power. I earned it. 1 line of code, 1 quiet equity purchase, 1 sleepless night at a time. I slid the motion across the table. Let's vote, I said. quietly. And they did, unanimously, because when the foundation starts cracking, you don't hand the hammer to the kid who caused the quake. You give it to the person who never stopped holding the blueprint. That night's board meeting wasn't canceled, it was quietly expedited. No email blast, no agenda memo, no calendar ping to the wider staff. Just a time slot shift and a location change. Conference room C7, the old one, with the long walnut table and the analog speakerphone that always cut out at the worst moment. I arrived 5 minutes early, like always. Declan showed up 4 minutes late, like always. But this time, he didn't strut. He didn't smirk. He didn't even bring his laptop. Just a yellow notepad and a pen he kept flipping in his fingers like a nervous tick. The others were already seated. Bradford, Holloway, Singh, Martins. And then came the final arrival. Paul Brandt himself. Gray flannel suit, black dress shoes, scuffed but polished. His hair had gone white, but his eyes still had that granite weight that made entire departments hold their breath when he walked by. He didn't shake hands, didn't sit right away. Just looked across the table at his son, then at me, then back at the table. When he did speak, it wasn't loud, but it hit like a dropped gavel. "Did you fire the person who owns Boltgrid?" Declan froze. The pen stopped spinning. He started too fast, like he could recover with charm. "I didn't know she—" Paul cut him off with a single word. "Did you ask?" It landed like a blade. No inflection, no rage, just a flat question that had nowhere to go but down. Declan swallowed, said nothing. The silence thickened. Paul nodded, then sat down slowly. He didn't even open his folder. "Motion to remove Declan Brandt as acting CEO," Bradford said, reading from a sheet of paper that had clearly been printed before the meeting started. "Seconded," Singh said without blinking. "All in favor?" Hands rose. All of them. Even Holloway, who'd once called Declan a fresh perspective. It was over before it began. Declan didn't speak. He didn't argue. He didn't stand. Next motion. Motion to reinstate oversight of Boltgrid operations to Levycor Solutions under Emergency Contract Authority, Martins read. "Seconded," Holloway said this time. Passed. Unanimous. Then came the final blow. Motion to revisit WelderTech's internal equity governance policies and audit all existing stakeholder rights, including Class B shareholder oversight. That one landed with a bit more weight, because it meant the rules were about to change, and everyone at the table knew who would be writing the first draft. Unanimous again. I signed nothing that night. No contracts, no apologies, no rehire paperwork, no consultant badge. Just one thing, the resolution. It passed with my vote included. The weight of 60.3% of the company pressed down gently like a signature on warm wax. When it was over, Declan stood, still holding that same useless pen. He looked at me. No more anger, no more ego. Just a boy who finally understood what power looked like when it didn't need a spotlight. I didn't look back. I gathered my notes, nodded to Paul, and left the room. No speeches, no gloating, just structure, restored. Now I run things my way. Quietly. Precisely. From an office just a few blocks away from where it all started. Still in Kansas City. Still with the same view of the skyline I used to glance at between system updates. Only now, I'm not buried under someone else's ladder. I'm the architect of the building. Levycor Solutions evolved into something sharper. A portfolio of tools, operations frameworks, supply chain engines, data-integrated schedulers, all designed to solve the messes people like Declan never see coming. We don't pitch at conferences, we don't have a TikTok, we have contracts, and those contracts are ironclad. Boltgrid still runs WelderTech's arteries. Better than ever, actually. We rewrote the interface, hardened the security layers, added predictive rerouting that saved them $4.6 million last quarter alone. It's under a clean 10-year license now, with mandatory oversight by my team. Not because I insisted, but because the board did. They learned the hard way that independence without accountability is just a prettier version of failure. They don't call me contractor anymore. They call me partner. As for Declan, last I checked, his LinkedIn said, seeking opportunities. No job listed, no press features, no podcast appearances, just a frozen smile in a too-tight blazer and a trail of connections who've quietly distanced themselves. He hasn't posted since the day after the board vote. Paul and I speak sometimes. not often, usually brief emails. He once wrote, "I forgot where the soul of this place came from. You didn't." I didn't reply. He didn't expect me to. And me? I never raised my voice, never made threats, never marched through the office demanding titles or recognition. I just did the work. Then, when the time came, I walked out. Badge on the desk, calm steps, no drama, and I let the paperwork speak. It said everything that needed saying. Because power doesn't scream, it signs the contract and holds the keys.